The plains of Little Big Horn bore witness to one of the most defining and tragic moments in American military history. On June 25, 1876, Major Marcus Reno found himself in the midst of chaos, confusion, and a series of critical decisions that would forever shape his legacy. Reno's role in the infamous defeat of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer's forces has been overshadowed by Custer's dramatic demise, but Reno's actions, or inactions, are central to understanding why the battle unfolded as it did. Reno's hesitation to push forward, his withdrawal to the bluffs, and his failure to decisively support Custer in the final hours of the battle have made him a figure of intense historical scrutiny. Was Reno acting out of caution and necessity, or was he paralyzed by fear and indecision? As we peel back the layers of this iconic military failure, we uncover the complexities of leadership in the fog of war, the psychological weight of command, and the strategic miscalculations that doomed Custer and his men. When Reno received his orders from Custer, they seemed straightforward. He was to advance into the valley, engage the Sioux village, and expect support from Custer's forces. The language of the order, "The whole outfit will support you," created a false sense of assurance for Reno. Believing Custer was close behind, Reno led his men forward with confidence. However, as Reno descended into the valley, the situation rapidly deteriorated. The Native American encampment was far larger than anticipated, and Reno's skirmish line quickly came under heavy fire from Sioux warriors. His men were soon outflanked and outnumbered, facing a ferocity they were ill prepared for. As the enemy swarmed around them, Reno's line began to falter, and the grim realization that Custer's support was not coming settled in. At this critical juncture, Reno's leadership was put to the test. The responsibility of command weighed heavily upon him as he attempted to maintain control in an increasingly dire situation. It was clear that holding the line in the valley would lead to certain annihilation. What was less clear, however, was whether retreating would spell doom for Custer's forces elsewhere on the battlefield. Reno's decision to withdraw was shaped by fear of losing his men in a futile stand, and fear of failing his commander. Reno's charge was doomed from the start, not necessarily because of his execution, but because of the flawed nature of Custer's plan. The division of forces, splitting Reno, Benteen, and Custer into separate detachments, left each vulnerable. Custer's overconfidence in his ability to coordinate and control the battlefield from afar was a significant strategic miscalculation. The sheer size of the native forces was underestimated, and the lack of reliable communication compounded the error. Reno's position was untenable from the moment he entered the valley, and his choices reflected the impossible dilemma he faced. Adding to the tactical difficulties was Reno's emotional struggle. Custer's confidence in his own plans created immense pressure for Reno. He was not just leading a charge, he was tasked with proving that Custer's strategy was sound. When the battle began to turn against him, the stress of being abandoned became overwhelming. Reno's realization that his men were outnumbered and unsupported heightened his internal conflict. Was he to proceed and lose his men in what seemed like a futile sacrifice, or retreat and preserve their lives at the potential cost of the overall mission? Reno's hesitation revealed his internal turmoil, caught between the guilt of perceived failure and the drive to survive. Reno's decision to retreat to the bluffs has been interpreted by some as an act of tactical prudence, while others view it as a panicked flight in the face of overwhelming odds. At approximately 2:21 p.m., Reno ordered his men to fall back, abandoning their position in the timber and racing across the river to higher ground. The retreat was disorganized, with soldiers scattered and many abandoning their weapons in the rush to safety. This retreat through Chautik likely saved the lives of many of Reno's men. Holding the timber would have meant being encircled and slaughtered. However, in the broader context of the battle, the retreat had devastating consequences. Reno's withdrawal removed pressure from the Sioux village, allowing the warriors to refocus their efforts on Custer's isolated battalion to the north. Custer, already outnumbered, was now completely exposed to the full force of the native resistance. Reno's retreat speaks to the psychological strain placed on commanders in the heat of battle. While military strategy is often discussed in terms of cold logic and calculated risk, the reality is that commanders must make life and death decisions in real time, often with incomplete information. Reno's retreat was not just a tactical maneuver. It was a response to the overwhelming sense of vulnerability he felt. The weight of command, the responsibility for the lives of his men, became a crushing burden as he realized that the fight was slipping out of his control. Here, it's important to delve into Reno's personal perspective. There's reason to believe that Reno, aside from fearing for his men, may have also feared that Custer had abandoned him. Given the trust he placed in Custer's orders, the realization that he had been left alone to fend for himself could have fostered a sense of betrayal. As such, his retreat might not only have been driven by tactical considerations, but also a growing doubt in Custer's leadership and a fear that he had been left to die without support. Not long after Reno reached the safety of the bluffs, Captain Frederick Benteen arrived with his battalion. Benteen had been sent on a reconnaissance mission by Custer and, upon returning, was shocked to find Reno's men in retreat. As Benteen surveyed the battlefield, it became clear that Custer's forces were in desperate need of reinforcements. Gunfire could be heard to the north, and the smoke rising from the battlefield indicated that Custer was engaged in a fierce battle. Benteen urged Reno to push forward and assist Custer, but Reno, shaken by the earlier retreat and unsure of Custer's exact location, hesitated. The confusion of the battlefield, coupled with Reno's fear of another ambush, led him to make the fateful decision to stay on the bluffs. This delay would prove catastrophic for Custer and his men. In military terms, timing is often the deciding factor between victory and defeat. Reno's hesitation to advance, coupled with Benteen's failure to assert command, left Custer isolated. Had Reno and Benteen moved decisively northward, they might have been able to relieve Custer, or at least provide enough pressure to allow Custer's men to regroup. Instead, the opportunity slipped away as Reno fortified his position, and Custer's battalion was systematically overwhelmed by the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors. Benteen's role and criticism, Benteen's own actions in this moment, warrant deeper scrutiny. While Reno hesitated, Benteen could have taken stronger action to push forward toward Custer. Despite his recognition of the dire situation, Benteen seemed reluctant to assume command or to challenge Reno's decision. This raises questions about his own leadership at that moment. Why didn't Benteen push harder? Was he equally shaken by the chaos of the battle, or did he believe that the situation was already beyond saving? Benteen's failure to act decisively, much like Reno's, has been the subject of criticism in the aftermath of the battle. Among the officers, one man was unwilling to sit idly by. Captain Thomas Weir, commanding D Company, decided to act. Without waiting for orders, Weir led his men northward in an attempt to make contact with Custer's beleaguered forces. His bold initiative, while admirable, was too little and too late. Weir and his men reached a vantage point that would later be known as Weir Point. From this elevated position, they could see the smoke of battle and the distant movements of Sioux warriors. The sight was grim. Custer's forces were already being overwhelmed. Weir's attempt to rescue Custer was noble, but it was ultimately futile. His small detachment could do nothing against the overwhelming native force. Weir's initiative, though ultimately unsuccessful, stands in stark contrast to Reno's hesitation. Where Reno was paralyzed by uncertainty, Weir embodied the spirit of decisive action, even in the face of overwhelming odds. His actions provide a glimpse of what might have been possible had Reno and Benteen been quicker to act. Weir's boldness presents an interesting case of leadership under extreme circumstances. His decision to push northward reveals a different kind of leadership, one driven by initiative rather than calculated risk. Weir likely knew the odds were against him, but his sense of duty and the need to act in the face of crisis overcame any concerns for personal safety. This decisive move, though doomed to failure, is a clear example of how different styles of leadership emerge under pressure. While Reno was cautious, even paralyzed, Weir embraced risk, embodying a different kind of courage. As the afternoon wore on and the reality of Custer's fate became clear, Reno and Benteen prepared for the worst. The Sioux and Cheyenne forces, now victorious over Custer, began to shift their attention toward Reno's position on the bluffs. What followed was a brutal siege, with Reno's men fighting to hold their ground against wave after wave of native attacks. The night of June 25, 26 was filled with tension and exhaustion. Reno's men, demoralized by the knowledge that Custer and his battalion had been wiped out, hunkered down for a long night of defensive fighting. The high ground provided a strategic advantage, but the psychological toll of the day's events weighed heavily on the survivors. By the morning of June 27th, reinforcements finally arrived, and the battle came to a close. Reno's men had survived, but the cost of their survival was steep. The defeat of Custer and the loss of so many soldiers marked one of the darkest chapters in U.S. military history. It's important to consider the perspective of the rank-and-file soldiers under Reno's command. Many of them likely felt abandoned, not just by Custer, but by their own commanders. As they fought to hold their ground on the bluffs, they would have been well aware of the disaster unfolding elsewhere on the battlefield. The psychological toll on these men, fighting for survival, while knowing that Custer's forces had been decimated, must have been immense. While the high ground gave them a tactical advantage, their emotional state was one of fear, exhaustion, and likely resentment toward the decisions that had led them to this point. As the battle dragged on, Reno's emotional and psychological state deteriorated. He had already made several difficult decisions: retreating, holding his ground, and refusing to advance. Now, knowing that Custer and hundreds of soldiers were dead, Reno faced a new kind of weight: the burden of guilt. Did his hesitation contribute to their deaths? The siege on the bluffs became more than just a physical test. It was a test of Reno's emotional endurance as well. Marcus Reno's actions at Little Big Horn are a study in the complexities of leadership during crisis. His decision to retreat likely saved his battalion, but it also sealed the fate of Custer and his men. The hesitation to advance, the failure to reinforce Custer in time, and the inability to seize the initiative all contributed to one of the most infamous defeats in American history. Historians continue to debate what might have happened if Reno had acted differently. Could a coordinated effort with Benteen and Weir have changed the outcome of the battle? Perhaps. But the reality of the situation is that Reno, faced with overwhelming odds and limited information, made choices that reflected the intense pressure of the moment. In the end, Reno's legacy is one of missed opportunities, a commander caught between the conflicting demands of survival and duty, whose hesitation ultimately contributed to the disaster at Little Big Horn. His story is a reminder of the profound and often irreversible consequences of leadership decisions made in the heat of battle. The Battle of Little Big Horn will forever be remembered as a moment of both heroism and tragedy. Marcus Reno, while not the central figure, played a crucial role in determining its outcome. His retreat, while saving lives, left Custer exposed to the full might of the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors. The missed opportunities to act decisively, to advance with Benteen, or join Weir's push north remain a haunting what if in American military history. In the fog of war, hesitation can be as deadly as the enemy, and Reno's legacy is a testament to the dangers of indecision.